welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. Psych Sessions is now sponsored by STP, the Society for the Teaching of Psychology, also known as APA Division II, also known as our Teaching Tribe. Mark your calendars for STP's annual conference on teaching, October 8 to 10 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Submit a proposal before April 10th. For more information, visit teachpsych.org and look under conferences. There are also several open calls for STP members to get involved in STP's initiatives. So visit teachpsych.org and click on the Get Involved link to see a list of current openings. Finally, STP maintains an online job posting website which is open to anyone to view. But only STP members may post announcements. Look under the Resources tab on Teach Psych. If you aren't yet a member of STP, Eric and I encourage you to become a member of STP. For only $25 a year, you get a lot of great stuff. And finally, before we get into today's episode, we want to invite you to go to iTunes and to look for the Psych Sessions podcast and rate us there. It helps us to pop not only for psychology-related searches, but for teaching-related searches. And now, on to today's episode.
Hello, and welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Eric Landrum, along with Garth Neufeld, your podcast hosts. As the name implies, we center on conversations about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting topics, which is the end stuff. This is episode number 86, where Garth had the opportunity to interview David Daniel from James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Now, before you hear the interview, please allow me to share some listening tips and some of my favorite moments. And before we get started with that, allow me to thank STP and ACT Director of Programming Jordan Troisi for providing the programming space in Denver in October of 2019 as we recorded this podcast. All right, so you're in for a treat as you get to hear and learn about David Daniel, his background, and his deep thoughts about higher education in general and psychology in particular. David comes from a fascinating background, a lot of which I learned about for the first time, even though I think I've probably known David for at least 15 years. He has a stand-up comedy background. Some of that overlapped with his graduate school and some of his first jobs in psychology. He gets his start, actually, teaching and helping develop a tribal college. He gets his start in the teaching of psychology in that world per se, although he's going to call it a cult, from Tom Pusateri, who at the time, he doesn't really come out and say it, but it's, I think, while Tom is still at Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa. So it's interesting. I do like this little tag or this little punch. STP is the only cult that costs $25 annually. I got a feeling there's probably other cults out there that have, an annual cost. And what I like and what I hope others appreciate about David is that he is purposely provocative. And he will tell you sheepishly, I think at times, I just say stuff. I don't always, and I think what he means by that is that he doesn't always mean exactly everything that he says verbatim. He wants to be provocative. He wants to have conversations. He loves the debate of ideas and the thinking about ideas. And so I appreciate that about him. I appreciate that he reads deeply and across journals and across different disciplines. And so it's fun to get him to sit down like he did with Garth and have this conversation. He's totally passionate about the science of teaching, the science of learning, and the science of assessment. And it's fascinating to hear him talk about how SoTL, or even the science of learning, is not the same thing as the science of teaching. I would have loved to have pressed him ever so gently, because he does talk about dependent variables, and that sometimes researchers in these educational areas of research have the DV wrong. But it's hard to think about if we were to have a science of teaching, which would be fascinating. Some of the dependent variable outcomes would have to be things about student learning. And so it's lovely to hear him and Garth go through these mental gymnastics and think about these ideas. It really is truly thought-provoking. They talk about OER, Open Educational Resources, and whether you have doubts about OER or if you're a proponent of OER, I really want you to tune in and listen to this part of the podcast because you're going to hear perspectives that you don't often hear. And I think they're thought-provoking. And I hope our audience will just take it as a different perspective and maybe a balanced perspective that, point counterpoint and appreciate it for what it is. I really did appreciate that David opened up about his background. I learned a lot of stuff I really didn't know, that he grew up in a Hispanic part of Los Angeles that was very influential in his upbringing. He talked about his grandparents being African American. Not only was he the first person in his family to go to college, he was the first person in his family to finish high school. On top of that, first-gen college student, he actually even finished high school a year early. So he was an extra young college student when he started college. He was a psychology major all throughout college, but he enjoyed minoring in political science. I'll let him tell you the stories about that as well. He talks about his undergraduate psychology education, and I'm going to use the word tumultuous. He might use different terminology, but I think he struggled, as many of our current day first generation college students do. And I really appreciated David taking a few minutes during this podcast to really talk about his passion of helping students who need the help. And it's beyond just first gen. He really talked about tribal colleges. And when Garth asked him and pressed him a little bit about, well, where did you get that? Where does that come from? David talks about how at one point in his career, he just kind of looked at, what are the 5 poorest areas of the country in terms of educating students? And I think he identified 2 of those 5 were in tribal areas in South Dakota. And so he has made a lifelong commitment, really, to going back to certain areas in South Dakota almost every summer since his professional career has started, and helping out and helping them in a way they wanted help, not in a way that he thought they should be helped. And so I really appreciate him sharing that essence of him that I don't think you get when you hear him speak at a conference or when you read the things that he's written in journal articles or book chapters. And so, again, it was a lovely conversation and interchange between David and Garth that I really appreciated him opening up about. Towards the end, and I know you want to get to the podcast, so I'm going to wrap up my comments here. Garth asks him, towards the last 10, 15 years of your career, what problems do you want to solve? What do you want to tackle? And David comes right back. It's awfully cocky to think that you're going to solve a problem, and reframes it more as, what game do you want to play? Because it's really about playing a game, and from David's perspective, thinking about, what angles can you pursue something? What can we better understand and explore? Not that we're going to ever solve these complex problems. The teacher and the teaching learning interaction is so complex that David just doesn't think you can boil it down to an equation or something that can be easily explained. It's just, there's just too many things going on and too many alternative explanations that can falsely attempt to explain the DV of student learning outcomes. Anyway, I think you're in for a real treat, and I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode.
Well, we are at the annual conference on teaching. It is 2019, October 2019, and I am in Denver, Colorado, and my guest today is David Daniel, Dr. David Daniel from James Madison University. So welcome to the podcast.
Man.
Yeah,
it's good to be here.
You are a person who's been on our list for a long time, but I'm
on a lot of people's lists.
which list?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the answer, or the question, I guess. So you've been on our list for a long time because you've been at this whole thing for a while, and you've done a lot of things in teaching of psychology. And you and I don't know each other very well, so this will be kind of fun to get to know each other. And so for people like me, I hope that we can just introduce them to you, your work, and what your experiences of teaching psychology have been over the years. So
it's been 25 years, 20 years.
Really?
Yeah.
How long have you been involved nationally? That whole time?
Around 96, I started at a regular four-year university. Before that, I helped start a tribal college in South Dakota, and I was working there, and I had another thing I was doing before. And I came across, one of the professors gave me a TOP, right? And then I came across Tom Pusateri, and I never thought you could actually have a career doing this. And he had built his career kind of around this. So I applied to his school because I didn't know anything about this stuff. Got the interview, talked to him, did not take the job. It wasn't a good fit. But by meeting Tom and him inspiring me to engage, that's when it started. So that happened probably 99, 2000.
Really?
And then I published my first article right around then.
Okay.
And if it wasn't for Randy Smith being a kind editor, I never would have published at all.
Really? What was it about Randy?
I didn't know the format. I didn't do a really scientific format. I just thought, it's teaching. Who cares? So here's what I did, right? It was good data and everything, but he just, instead of saying, no, who the hell are you? Get off my lawn. He wrote back saying, look, rewrite it, do it like this, da-da-da. And that got out there. When that published in the same edition volume that Regan had a study. And so I called him up and said, hey, I heard there's a teaching conference. Let's work together on this. We both did. Met Jane there. So
what year was that?
That was probably 2001, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, almost 20 years.
Yeah. And then I went to NITOP, met Doug. Doug kind of showed me the ropes.
Bernstein.
Yeah, gave me a chance to do a talk. Just those people kind of took me under their wing and helped socialize me as much as I can be socialized.
What's your conference like? What's the one that you've been to the most consistently over the 20 years? Has it been this one, P3 Best Practices, or
no? It's my first time. It's my first time.
This is your first time here?
Mm-hmm.
No way.
Yeah, I was asked when Natalie Kerr was doing it. She asked me to talk a few times, but I thought since we were in the same department, that wouldn't be cool, so I didn't do that. And then when I moved to James Madison, my travel funding got cut more than I was used to, so I had to really be selective. NITOP's always been home, in part because Doug made that a home for me, and Jane, everybody was there. Yeah. And also I can take some really nice risks. I feel very safe there. So a lot of my talks there, they get some buzz because I take big risks that I'm not comfortable taking other places.
Yeah, I think, so you're going to have to, we hear just in our circles, if we don't know each other, and I've known of you for years, first through Sue Franz, I think, because she has, she's amazing. Yeah. But you do have this reputation, and I think it might be the NITOP stuff, and I think most recently, maybe last year even.
Yeah, that was a fun talk. Yeah.
Talk to me about it. What was it? Because I just remember that it was I wasn't at NITOP. So what was the talk?
I'm not telling you. You got to pay the fee.
It's a big fee,
right? It is, but you get like all this food.
It's true.
You notice I don't know, people can't see this because it's not video, but I've lost like 80 pounds because I can't afford to go to NITOP anymore.
Oh my gosh! Have you really lost 80 pounds?
Yeah.
No
It'll
way.
come back. I didn't throw any of my clothes. But anyway, the talk was basically it was on. I called it faith-based teaching to go against the evidence-based teaching. So how this evidence is out there, but we're still basing our practice around things that make us feel good. And I argued that a lot of the things that we're doing are because we joined a cult. I actually called the STP the only cult that costs $25 annually to be part of. But I identified the social pressures on us to say the lecture is bad, even though the research doesn't really show that. Say that active learning is good, even though the literature is all over the place on that. And why are we still fronting like that? There must be other reasons, because it can't be because it's empirical. It's because there's in-groups and out-groups in the world, and and teachers, we're not valued a lot of times in the context we live in. So when we find a place that values us, we tend to kind of ease into that And
Yeah, we definitely grab our pitchforks from time to time on certain issues. I think that's what you're getting at, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's more nuanced than that. So did you try to unpack, like, was it a research talk, or was it like a conceptual?
Conceptual. Almost all the time at NITOP, I'll do something that's big picture. One of the things that I stopped coming to anything for 4 years or so, and I can tell you that story later if you want, but is because we don't take the time to build ourselves as a field. We, as SoTL, whatever you want to call it, it's atheoretical. We don't build on past other people's studies. It's not programmatic. We're not pulling it all together. We're not synthesizing. You see the same thing in the literature about every 7 years. There'll be the same study saying the same kind of thing. And one of the things I really want to see happen is for us to evolve as a field so that we can actually move toward actually good teaching practice, as opposed to publishing something in a teaching journal, which is not the same thing as moving toward good practice.
Okay, so say more about that. So currently, are you saying people are? It might be the case that we're siloed and it's just about the article rather than understanding what the contribution is to the wider understanding of teaching psychology.
And building on it. For example, we have a science of learning. We don't have a science of teaching.
Right.
We have SoTL, which is not the same as focusing on how does teaching work? How do we activate the learner as an instructor to do the work of learning? Those sorts of things. What we tend to show are pedagogical strategies, and basically, in SoTL, it's often a proof of concept. Look, it worked in my classroom. Mm-hmm. So you should try it. Mm-hmm. Well, not all classrooms are the same. Not all teachers are the same. Not all content's the same. What is the secret sauce that made it work? Back that thing that worked, why? Well, that's not necessarily something we require in our studies. We know that this thing worked. Because if I adapt it to my classroom and I don't know why it really worked, I may adapt the secret sauce right out of it because I don't know why it worked.
Right.
And I can't do it just like in the journal. Number one, there's not enough in the method section to replicate it perfectly in your classroom. Number two, that's not my classroom where it worked.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of stuff.
Yeah. Do you think that people, like the leading researchers in teaching of psychology, do you think they have a broad enough view of the history of what's been studied and then and what's out there? Are we synthesizing?
No, we're not.
We're not.
I'll say that unequivocally. And if anybody wants to write to Garth, he'll send me the email. No, I'll say that unequivocally. It's not our style to synthesize. There's people who are prolific, usually in a similar level of analysis the whole time, but who's putting all this together? There's no grand theory of teaching that we're developing. There's no, this retrieval practice thing worked in my classroom, all right, and that's as close we get as to being theoretical, saying, look, it's called retrieval practice. But there's the Lindsay Maslin and I are going through every journal for the last 20 years. As part of the SoTL task force. And what we're seeing are things that worked, not much why, not much synthesis. Here's a socio-emotional intervention. Here's a cognitive intervention. Well, in real life, both of those things work at the same time in the same person, in a real person, right? So I have to synthesize those two. Why not put a mindset intervention behind a cognitive intervention? Why not talk about let's take flashcards, for example. Flashcards for math, drilling over and over and over. If my dependent variable is learning math, they totally work.
Yeah.
Right? If my dependent variable is sucking the soul from the learner, they also work.
Yeah.
But if I'm a cognitive research, I'm not measuring soul. And if I'm emotional research, I'm not measuring cognitive. So we're all good. I got my publication.
Yeah.
As a teacher, I got to think of both things.
Right. I'm trying to think about these systems that are in place and at what level things would need to change in order to do this better, to get this more complete understanding of how learning works.
Well, I think Aaron's got some good ideas for the journal. I think Drew has done some really incredible things, taken some really nice risks, especially in the last 3-4 years, to start setting the foundation for that. When you talk to some of the people who are doing the work, they talk about it. There's just not there's no outlet. For example, at a teaching conference, who's going to go to a talk to talk about how do we balance internal and external validity to get externally valid results that still have the integrity of a scientific study, right? Not a good talk. Super important if you want to have evidence demonstrated, practice. So there has to be a place for that, and hopefully we're moving toward that. But if we don't, we're going to just keep doing the same stuff, same kind of stuff, over and over and over. We'll just say, hey, cassette tapes you don't learn much from cassette tapes if you do read the book. Now we're going to say, oh, you don't learn as much from an audio podcast if you don't read the book. Then we're going to say something else. Same stuff, different technology. It's not going to evolve. Well, I need to know why. If you don't do as well in an electronic textbook, we know we don't, I need to know why so I can make a better electronic textbook.
Right. It seems like there are only a select few people, small group, let me just say this, small group of people who can wade into that conversation, who have enough experience creating this stuff and doing the research to know. And I think I've heard, actually, what you're saying, I think, is something that I've heard Steve Chu talk a little bit about.
Steve and I, every time I think of a new idea, I call him. He's thought of it like 3 days before, and he says it 20 times better.
I loved his brewer talk at APA, where last year, he told me ahead of time. He said, "It's so important." He's like, "It's going to be." I think he said to me something like, "It's going to be a bad talk because it's so important. I don't want to miss any of the words that I've scripted out." And so he kind of read it, to us. But it was profound.
He's like that.
Yeah.
He's incredible. We're both doing a talk in Atlanta in a few weeks, and we just touched base. He came back from a talk, and we touched base, and he asked me, "What's your talk going to be on?" And I said, "I'm going to talk about how if the research is for teaching, insignificant findings are really important, and significant ones may not be." He said, "That's what I was going to talk about," and I thought I was like the man thinking about that.
So where did you guys end on it? Who's
giving
the
first?
talk?
I'm doing it.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, he can't.
What's the conference?
It's on metacognition, and a big RCT from the First in the World Project Department of Education did at Spelman College.
Okay.
And they're unveiling their results. And so for example, let's say the metacognition thing is coming from the lab or coming from small n is supposed to work, and we tried it and it doesn't. That people should know about that it doesn't work at scale. It doesn't work in a more complex context. That insignificance is super significant. Otherwise, people keep trying it over and over and failing, and no one ever knows about it. Right? So that's one of the things I'm going to talk about. And some things are significant, but they don't give us the effect size we need, or we don't know, and we don't report what the costs of implementation are. It may turn out that when you implement it, it'll work. It'll get you the scores that you want, but it takes you so much time and effort to do it. Other things that are important to you are also gone. So significant may not be that significant when you think about what a teacher needs to do to make it work.
Yeah.
So that was the idea behind. Well, that will be the idea behind that potential talk.
So what's your passion in what you're bringing to the teaching of psychology? Now you're 25 years into your career. What do you? Is this what you're passionate about right now?
I'm really passionate about trying to, in my own mind, and I sometimes when it's in my own mind, it comes out in my talks because I'm intellectually sensory motor. So I'll say it out to hear have people push my thinking, because when you think about these things, you're not necessarily working around like people who want to talk about this. You got to find people, and they got to help push your thinking and refine it. And I like putting the ideas out there, testing them through the fire, seeing which ones are viable, because you can't think everything yourself, right? But right now, and I don't know what I call it. Richard Mayer, decade or two ago, talked about this. There's a science of learning, there's a science of assessment, and there should be a science of teaching. That should be the science, what educational psychology should be, those three things together. There's no science of teaching. We don't have one. We don't have one that really specifically looks at the interaction between teacher, instructor, and learner, and talks about how those things work together in a symbiotic fashion to achieve the goals, right? So right now, one of my passions is trying to think, what would science look like if our goal was specifically to improve practice, not to get a grant, not to publish in the best journals, to accept the messiness, to accept the context, to make it a variable, to make the teacher a variable, to look at what a teacher really has to do, and how can we deploy science to understand that and improve it. So really focusing on teaching as opposed to learning.
Right. Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I'm just trying to process it. So, is there anybody out there who's wading into this right now?
I think there's pieces everywhere. That's the thing. There's pieces everywhere. Steve's a great example if you talk to him about things. Everybody has their piece of it, right? And we're in psychology in general, we're in a theoretical slump. There's not much theory out there anyway in our field. There's articles being written in the last month or two about what they call the theory crisis. And in SoTL, we've never had that. Right. And
Right.
And I don't see a huge distinction. Steve and I actually wrote that article, Tribalism and we talked about the potential for the science of learning and SoTL to be complementary. And several years since, I don't think it's possible. I think they just are doing two different things. And we need to have an emphasis in the field that bridges the gap that's right there. On one, you have promising principles. Science of learning is giving us promising principles. SoTL is giving us demonstrated practices, right? But those demonstrated practices may or may not map back to a promising principle. And those promising principles may never be actually applicable as a demonstrated practice. So who's bridging that gap and moving those forward so I can say, here's a recommended practice. Here's the principle it's based on. So if you adapt it, keep this sacred. Here's a demonstration that it works in this context, not in that context, because you need to know about side effects and boundary conditions. Once we know that, like a prescription, we can say, okay, for this issue, this problem, this is a recommended place to start from.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Dude, we're getting heavy.
No, I know, right out of the gates, right out of the gates. Well, let me ask you, because I know that I think we were talking about NITOP, we were talking about how you like to push the boundaries a little bit at NITOP. When you come up with an idea or when you have a critique of what we're doing, do you get pushback from other people?
Oh, of course. When I called OER a cult, OER textbooks.
Did you do that? Is that at NITOP?
They were one of my cults. Okay. Yeah, I got a lot of pushback from that, and I totally stand by it. Because one of Regan's studies that just came out this year talked about how especially for students with poor SAT scores, these are not good tools. And you think about what the political ramifications for that are. A lot of us who are kind, good-hearted people, I say us, a lot of you who are kind, good-hearted people want to try to help students, especially students who don't have a lot of money, any way possible, all right? But what we're doing by going to things that have not been proven to be effective is giving them less of an education. So for a student who needs an education for social mobility, they need the best we could possibly give them. Work on the other end. I negotiated with these big publishers, the ones that are the enemy for everybody. My books to my students are $50 each. That's about the same as a lot of the OER things because I push it and I negotiate, right? I want them, and I don't work at the kind of school I want to work at in terms of social mobility. I have more of a Kardashian campus, right? My goal in life would be to work with first generation college students if I possibly could, like I used to. And I want them to have the best, not the cheapest, not the experimental, not the thing that will make me feel good. It's a thing that will make them rock it when they graduate. It'll make them, the degree may help them get a job, but they have to represent. Sometimes they have to represent a lot harder than the people who came up the easy way, who know all the all the display rules and all the other sorts of things. I'm rough around the edges because of how I grew up, and I didn't want to change it that much. I don't want to have to think that much every day, right? So I have to be a little bit better than everybody else in some things. And my students, from this demographic we're talking about, they need to be better. And I'm not going to give them more stuff just because it saved them $5. Not going to happen.
I have talked to a lot of people about textbooks versus OER, and some on this podcast. I think the first person I had this conversation with, or a bit of this conversation with, was Dave Myers on an early podcast episode. Great guy. And that is the first time that I have ever heard somebody say, if it's better for this particular student. I'm sure lots of people have thought about this, but this is the first time I've ever heard somebody make the case for if it's better for these first-generation college students, then we may not need to look at the issue as just a money issue.
It's not a value issue. Think about it as this. It's a ratio of cost to impact. If I just look at cost and I negate the idea of impact, what have I done for that student? I've made me feel good and them feel good in the moment. They're sacrificing. They're getting an education, right? We need to give them the best, pure and simple.
So what does OER need to do?
Any new product, whatever it is, has to be at least as good as what it's replacing without worse side effects. It's all it has to demonstrate. It does not have to be better. It has to be at least as good as what it's seeking to replace. It's a low bar. And there are some, and people listening, they're saying, well, I use OER in my class and my book's good. Fine. Then start a list someplace and let people vet the books that are good, because there's a lot of them that aren't. And the empirical literature is all over the place with this stuff. Some people are like David Wiley's stuff says it's better, at least as good, right? But that's David Wiley, and he owns Lumen. And then some places you find it, so it's uneven until it's unequivocally the same without any different or worse side effects. We have to be skeptical and do a lot more homework. So I'm not saying it isn't potentially useful.
Well, it's interesting that there are studies out there that would just say OER versus, published textbooks, but there's so much variation in both those things.
That's the thing. There may be some really high-quality OERs out there, but we don't have a mechanism for identifying them. It's something as simple as someone can start a website, an STP website, and say, we're going to start vetting the OERs. We're going to, if you're using this, rate it for accuracy, rate it for engagement, rate it for impact.
Is anybody pushing back on this idea? It seems very common sense. Get
a lot of pushback because this is something that makes people feel good. They're OER because they think they're representing the student. They're advocating for the student, and they're really great people. There's nothing wrong. I love that idea, but I think I am too, by saying give them our best, not our cheapest. So, but I do get a lot of pushback when I say stuff like that. So think of it this way. During the war on hunger in the 50s and 60s in the United States, we were looking to get food to people in a way that was accessible and affordable. Those words sound familiar to you? Accessible and affordable? Okay. We worked hard at that. We got the prices down. We were able to, because of refrigeration, new roads, all these, we were able to massify it a little bit. We were able to get people accessible food and affordable food. You may remember TV dinners, okay? Those were one of the products of this, actually, okay? And a lot of box foods, okay? But they tasted terrible, so then they worked on taste. Well, let's call that engagement, student preference, okay? So now we have accessible, affordable, and enjoyable to some degree, okay? And using that formula, we solved the war on hunger. From across the United States, at least until the 70s when it started to pop back up again. All right, we also got diabetes, we also got obesity, we also got food deserts, because the stuff that was accessible and affordable wasn't nutritious, because our DV wasn't nutrition. Okay, in OER or in any of these adaptive learning systems or whatever we're talking about right now, if our DV is just cost, we'll get accessible, we'll get affordable, we may even get enjoyable. We may get an aisle full of Doritos. Right? I don't want a food desert because it's cheaper. I want high quality nutritional things going to the people who are in need of it, who want it, who are there. So I want nutrition. If we could drive the cost down in a whole bunch of ways, but we shouldn't sacrifice nutrition.
Oh my God. I am thinking to myself, as you're talking, I'm thinking, what we need to do, if you're up for it, well, and you don't have to be. In fact, we can edit this out.
I just say stuff.
No, if there is an OER advocate out there who we could sit down with at some point, the three of us, and we could do a little back and forth, a little friendly debate about it, I think that would be really interesting.
I'll always debate. Here's the way I look at things. Two people go into the cage, one can come out, or both, but there's going to be a cage. That's why I said the ideas need to get tested with fire. This one's got a lot of analogies in society where we pick the wrong dependent variable and we come out with unintended consequences.
Yeah, because I mean, what you're saying to me makes so much sense, and I am also not a part of, I don't use an OER a book or anything like that, so I am not well even read in the research on OER versus regular textbooks. But I feel like there's somebody who's an OER advocate out there who's listening to you right now, and saying, yeah, but David, you're missing this piece.
Well, maybe as long as they don't cherry pick the literature to come in here and say the evidence base says this, because we have other evidence and the proof's in the pudding,
Yep.
right? There is no mechanism in the OER world, as far as I know, that gives us a measure of quality.
Right.
When
When did you come up with that metaphor, by the way, the food metaphor?
driving through Iowa? I have a lot of I work on the reservations out in South Dakota still. So every summer I'm driving through Iowa a couple times, and all my big ideas come in Iowa.
Really?
Yeah, it's incredible.
That's fun.
But I was listening to an NPR program about the food, about the war on hunger, excuse me. And I went, dude, no way. This is exactly what's happening. And I was working on the Gates Foundation, the big grants they were using with the adaptive platforms and everything in community colleges during that time, and this was on my mind anyway. That's also where I came up with the idea that translating science to practice is best followed through what farmers do, as opposed to what doctors do.
Say more.
So I was driving through, and there was an extension agent talking about his job, and there was this one guy who wanted to build a pond for his cattle to drink from, but his soil is like this, so he has to build a pond like this, but he has to be careful because the soil just down the hill about a mile is different, and it would affect that farmer in a different way. This guy knew the science, he knew the farmers, he talked about the contextual variables, the different kind of cattle they had and everything, and his job was to bring science to them and them back to science in a way that was kind of intimate, in the sense that he knew the farmers, he knew what was going on. And if you think about translation to educational practice, we're using a medical model, which is fine as a metaphor, but you have to know the class. You can't just put a teacher in a room and a researcher in a room and expect that they're going to share the same vocabulary, the same goals, the same everything. You have to have an intermediate person, the translator, and the extension agent is a great example of what that could be. So that was an Iowa thing too.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So when you give talks, I've only seen you ever give one talk, and you told me
I give the same one over and over and over. No, actually, I never get the same talk twice. So.
Do you use a lot of metaphor, a lot of storytelling when you're giving talks?
Depending on the context, I like to. I like to show how this is like something else, and it didn't end up well for them. We can stop that. Accessible and affordable is just not enough. It has to be high impact, high nutrition.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, I want to know a little bit about who you are, and because I do think you have this unique voice, and you maybe talk about some of the more difficult things. I mean, I think there's a pressure. I'm thinking about cults now. I'm thinking about how in any kind of tribal situation, the leader stands up and tells people probably what they want to hear and what they're agreeable to. And you seem like that's not your highest priority, is to tell us how great of a job we're doing, or just like let's continue on the same path. You seem to have you're bringing a critique to teaching of psychology, and I'm wondering, have you always been that person who will step out and not do be the crowd favorite?
Well, I guess, yeah. I see. I'm the consummate outsider. Not consummate. I'm just an outsider. That's my perspective on everything. So I grew up that way. I watch a lot. And when people are saying stuff, a lot of times we say stuff because it facilitates social interaction, right? And I'm bad at facilitating social interaction. So without that skill, I just watch. And I just told you, I like my ideas to go through the fire.
Yep.
I don't even believe some of the things I say, but they have to be said so that we go through thinking about it from that perspective.
Yeah.
We don't think about it from that perspective. We haven't vetted it. And we're teachers. We're not researchers, just researchers. We're teachers. I mean, what we do has practical import, and we're going to be implementing it on other human beings.
Yeah.
So we owe it to ourselves to think about things from multiple perspectives all the time, because we don't think about potential side effects. Side effects are really important. So whether or not the king has the clothes, the emperor has the clothes, I don't mind naked people. As long as you go, dude's naked, we're good.
Call it out.
It's all good.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Los Angeles, in a largely Hispanic, kind of a gang town.
Okay, which neighborhood?
El Monte. It's
I don't
east
know
of LA.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did you spend your whole childhood in that?
In that same general area. I started college when I was 16, so when I was 16 I moved out. But yeah, and I was white, they weren't. So there was no gang for me, so I'm good. Nothing bad happened.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Oh, really? How did what was that like to be kind of the exception?
Well, when you're white, you still have privilege, right? You're still the guy on TV, and you're still all that, right? And I was really good at school, which didn't help. But no, I come from a weird background. My grandparents on one side are black. They lived in a place called Watts, which was also poor. And I bring that ethic with me everywhere I go. When you grow up not like the people on TV, whether it be social class or whatever, there's a part of you that always feels a little on the side, right? So instead of killing that person and trying to make my way into feeling middle class or feeling like that, I just kind of said, I'm cool with that. I'll work with it. And so I kind of embraced that. And I think that's why I'm able to go and work in some of the places I work, is because I don't have to act like I'm not who I was the whole time.
You said that you were a white kid in a Hispanic neighborhood. You said your grandparents were black in Watts?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm the whitest guy. I'm so white. Let me tell you how white I am. On the reservation a couple years ago, someone said, you got to have some native in you. And so we took a collection and brought me the Ancestry.com thing. And so it turns out the people who settled Western Europe came from the Caucasus. Okay. So I'm 100% white in every way and like 3% Caucasus. So I'm pretty sure I invented white people. That's how white I am.
Okay. Yeah.
I have a stepdad. That's why.
Okay.
That's how
I got it.
it wasn't a science experiment.
No. I was just, yeah. Okay.
But it's a cultural thing, right? You grow up in certain
Yeah.
cultures with certain kind of display rules, certain kind of ways,
right.
certain kind of values, things like that. I'm the first person in my family to ever go to college and the first to graduate high school. I was going to drop out of college. Someone talked me into high school. Someone talked me into staying. I was about 10 minutes from dropping out.
Why?
I wanted to go surfing.
Mm-hmm.
That's my thing.
Yeah.
And the school was stupid. And my counselor, I went and told him I was thinking of dropping out, and he basically said, "You're just a thug. Just go drop out." Which is hard being called a thug when no gang will have you.
No.
And I was president of the class. I was president of the junior class and the senior class the same year because I graduated early.
So what was it about you didn't see a future for yourself in education, or was this just your adolescent brain?
We were never taught that education was a big deal, man. Mm-hmm. It's just this thing other people did. There's other ways to survive in the world that are valuable, that'll make you a good living, that'll help you raise your family. Education's not. Some people do it, some people don't. I think sometimes we deify higher education and look down on people who don't have it, and I don't agree with that whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of ways to be happy in life, right?
Yeah.
And college education is not a guarantee of being happy. There's
Right.
lots of ways. So it wasn't a big deal to me, and I didn't know anybody. It's funny is I didn't know anybody who graduated college. Turns out all my teachers did. I just never figured that one out, right? So I didn't know about it when I started college. I was listening to. Rick give the opening, the presidential talk today. He was talking about mentors. Mm-hmm. And I applied to one college to work with one person because since first grade, all I wanted to do was train dolphins. Every paper I wrote was on training dolphins in World War II, whatever it was. Somehow I skipped grades, right? So luckily, like second grade, I don't know, I had no second grade, but every paper I ever wrote was on something about dolphins. And I went to San Diego State. I went to talk to the professor, and you got to keep in mind, I'm 16 years old, I'm chubby, and I've got a Mexican accent. Okay, so I walk into the guy's and I go, "Hi, I came here to work with you. That's why I come to college." And he looked at me and he goes, "What do you know?" And I said, "I read everything on dolphins," and I didn't know about journals, so I read every book you can on dolphins in our library, right? And he looked at me and he took me outside and he said, "There's no jobs in it for you. I'll never work with you. I don't want to talk to you again." And I was working full time, going to school full time, living under a sink in a bathroom because I couldn't afford an apartment or a room even. I was sorry, not a bathroom, in a kitchen. So I took the kitchen, we hollowed out took out the drawers, put my bed into it. The refrigerator was actually my closet, right? And I had no idea I was in college. I didn't know that you could transfer colleges. There was another college in San Diego I could have transferred to, but I didn't know it. I was first generation, da-da-da-da-da. And one of the things people don't understand about first generation students is we have all these resources. Sometimes we don't know what questions to ask.
Yep.
Right? And that hobbles us, not because of intellect, not because of motivation, not because of ethic, because we don't know your game. Right? So it took me a while to figure that out.
Yeah. Has that changed the way you, now where you're at right now, you don't have a lot of first generation students?
No, but I've somehow they're gravitating toward me, and that's I have a room that I've set up for study skills and things like that.
Yep.
It's just a casual place. Every time someone throws away a couch, a professor, I steal it and put it in that room, so I do find that, but it's not the majority. I think like my first two jobs were, that's an important group for me.
Yeah.
Especially as you get older and more generative.
Yep.
You know.
Yep. So you that professor tells you that you're not going to study dolphins at that point?
He won't talk to me again.
He won't talk to you again. Mm-hmm. So what do you do then?
You take your surfboard and you paddle around at night into SeaWorld and you play with dolphins.
What do you do then academically?
Oh, I just took class. I did all my GEs because you go to the advising center, and all they do is tell you how to what classes you need to take.
Yep.
So I actually failed my first Gen Psych class, got an F. That was right after that happened. I was in the class like, why am I even here, right? Just drifted around, getting my C's and D's. I think I got one B, not knowing why I was there, but not knowing what else to do for a while.
Yep.
So that,
you eventually become a psych major?
I always was a psych major because that's what department he was in. But then I played with political science. And I was really good at it, but I got really into Supreme Court law. I really liked the argumentation.
Yeah.
But I knew I couldn't afford to go to law school, so I made that my minor. But there was Larry Fenson at San Diego State. Took a real big chance on me, and had he not done that, I'd probably be rich right now.
So you do graduate with your BA in psychology?
Yeah, BA or BS. I don't know.
Yeah. And then you realize that you want to do graduate school?
No, Larry had me thinking that way.
Okay.
And I told you I was also a comedian.
Mm-hmm.
So the day I got offered a TV pilot is the same day I got accepted to grad school. And I had to decide right then which I wanted to do.
No.
Yeah.
What was the pilot for?
Oh, it didn't make it. I'm lucky.
Okay.
They were going to redo Love American Style in the 80s. So it's an old show. But anyway, they wanted me to be the blonde guy. By then I was better looking. You guys missed it. Yeah, and I got accepted to West Virginia University, which was like the lifespan developmental psychology program in the country with those grades I just told you. Larry worked really hard for me.
Wow. And that's your area?
Mm-hmm. Lifespan development. Because I didn't know how to make the world small. I didn't know how to specialize. Right? Development is everything from conception to death. I didn't have to say I was neuro. I didn't have to say, because development, you're always hyphenated. Social development, cognitive development, whatever. I didn't have to make my world small at that point, so it was the perfect thing to do.
What's your hyphen now?
I don't know. People give me different hyphens. So it was cognitive development but I've gotten an award for being for contributions through neuroscience and education. I've gotten, no one knows what I am. I've been called a learning scientist. I don't know. I just do stuff. I'm broadly trained. I was very well trained. And because of that, I have a flexible set of skills I can deploy in many contexts, just like what I want for my students with a liberal arts degree in psychology.
Right. Oh, that's nice how that circles back to that. Okay. I love stand-up comedy. So what do you have any lessons that you learned in stand-up comedy that translate well to teaching?
It's actually what in stand-up do I have to inhibit? My first 3 or 4 years as a teacher, I got in so much trouble. Because that little person inside you that says, don't say that, that's not appropriate?
Yeah.
I killed that guy.
Yeah.
right? Because you can't have a heckler and then think maybe I'm going to hurt his feelings, right?
Right.
So I had to learn the professors are weird. They're overly politically correct sometimes. They're this was right after Anita Hill, so there was like a version of Me Too happening then. There was these just words you couldn't say because someone could potentially be offended. Now, no one was ever offended, but the academy said they could be offended. Therefore, those words, when I'm around certain groups, like the groups I grew up with, I could say certain things. I can't say those same things around white people. Right? Academics are like the superheroes for everybody else too, right? So I had to learn that kind of appropriate, that kind of guardedness, and you couldn't go for the funny. You couldn't go for the absurd or just laugh when someone said something dumb in a department meeting because they're so serious. They must be right. They have a PhD. But I also learned things like, so when you're doing comedy, there's someone who warms up the crowd. All right. Well, I teach large sections. Mine are 300. Right. I can't teach 300 people. I can teach one class. So what do I do in the beginning of each class to turn them from 300 people into one class? I learned how to speak in a way that engaged people. I learned a lot of things you don't even know a style, a comfort with being in front of people. Comedy taught me to not want attention, which sounds really weird, but it also taught me, like, I'm teaching to get a certain impact. I want them to learn, right? A comedian, I want them to laugh. I know when I've done worked when they laugh. When I'm a teacher, how do I know what I did worked? Right. So that's another ethic that got me really involved in teaching of psychology. Is I have to. Where's my laugh? Where's my learn?
Yeah.
Right.
That's the assessment. Is the laugh.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So I'm looking for my learn. Where's my learn? I started getting teaching awards, and the other faculty were like, oh, he's just funny. He's not a good teacher. They just like him. So I start collecting data. I go, no, you're wrong. Why don't you use the same final as me? Let's see who's doing this. Two go in the cage, one comes out. Let's do this.
Where did you get this combative streak?
You can't come. Look how you grew up. You can't come at me like that and expect me just to take it. That's weak.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So I'll engage, and if I lose, I lose. There's ability in trying. Right.
Right.
I've had a growth mindset much longer than the word existed.
Who were your comics that you liked watching growing up, or when you were a teenager?
I didn't watch them.
Oh, you didn't?
No, I was surfing one day, and I went by the Comedy Store to get a hot chocolate. It was a really cold day, and a guy named Frank King was on stage, and I was too young because remember I started college when I was 16, so I was too young to go into the club.
The Comedy Store. That's Is it? Are you talking about the? Isn't there a location called the Comedy Store? Oh, okay. Yeah. In LA, right?
There's one in LA, one in San Diego.
That's right. Okay.
And Frank was on stage. I was in the other room, and he was not doing well. He was bombing, small group, and he just said, "I guess I'll just stand up here with my hand in my pocket, stimulating myself. Oh, I'll stay up here with stimulating myself. No one's laughing." And I said, "Take your hand out of your pocket." Everybody laughed. He got mad, came down, and said, "That's not cool. You don't do that." And I go, "Sorry, I've never been in a place like this. What do you want me to do to make it up to you?" He says, "You go on stage next week. You see how easy this is." Right? So I said, "Fine." So the manager said it was okay for a youngin' to go up there, and I did, and it was actually really awesome.
Really?
Yeah. It was such a big risk. It was such a being in the moment. You think about surfing, you think about comedy, you think about teaching. You're best when you're in that moment, not thinking about the next one, not worrying about the last one, living that moment. That's why I like the talks rather than writing stuff down. It's that moment that matters.
Yeah. Would you say that you kind of like one of the most enjoyable parts of your career now is giving a talk, being in that moment?
Yeah, because I get to be in that moment, and then I get to talk with people about give me your reaction. It helps me get my thinking better. But like I never give up my PowerPoint slides. I won't let anybody video me. It's that moment. That moment is live. It's right now, and it's over when it's over. It does not exist once. It's ethereal.
Why is that important to you?
Because that's the truth. Right. Everything else is your interpretation of it's a reconstruction of something that you don't have the multimodal information to reconstruct.
Interesting. Yeah. Being part of the moment. Yeah.
Literally being part of it. Like you being there makes that moment. whether you're listening, whether you're, walking by, whether that's that moment. It's really, it's a weird way to look at things, but I totally live for that moment, every moment.
Yeah. So you get your PhD in developmental lifespan development. And what do you do? Anything that we're missing in there?
I was doing comedy the whole time. When I got out toward the East Coast, it was during the comedy boom of the 90s, and when people found out, 80s, when people found out there was a comedian out that far from LA, from the Comedy Store, and the Improv, they were anxious to get me on the road. So I would do weekend shows. I would do a big show at the school every semester, and I would do all summers. And then I took a year off after my master's to go on the road. Then I came back, ABD, finished up the stuff. And then I went on the road, ABD, and I was never going to finish my PhD. I was making really good money, doing really cool stuff, writing for some shows and stuff. And I still write for people. But it was just a blast. And I was able to take the money I was making and work on the reservations for free. I didn't have to worry about it.
Talk to me about the reservations. What's that work all about, and where did it start?
It just started with me being in LA, moving to LA because of the TV stuff and everything, and getting so self-absorbed, because that's what people in the entertainment business are, completely self-absorbed. And I didn't like the feeling, so I thought, I got a PhD. Well, I don't know my PhD was done then. I don't know. I think I had a PhD by then. But I'm really good with kids. Like I worked in elementary schools to pay my way through college, and I'm really good with kids. And I'm going to go work with kids. So I looked at a list of the poorest counties in the country. Okay, of the bottom 5, I think 3 or 4 out of the bottom 5 were all native. The 2 poorest ones were in South Dakota. I found work for free. That's where I'm going to go. Had nothing to do with thinking natives are cool or want to be part of the culture, or has specifically to do if I'm going to work for free, I'm going to go to places where free's needed.
So what did you do?
I went out there and worked with kids for free.
Just schools or
no,
camps?
I started off in a summer, so we started off with a camp, and then we started the tribal college to help get the certification of things that people need to stay in their own community, not hire off the reservation for people. It just grew into lots of different things.
Hold on. So you and a group of people started a tribal college, or how did that work?
Yeah, there was a woman named Mary Sue Schneider who was working to start a tribal college. I hooked in with her to help start the first programs, finance, and get the articulation agreements, do all these things. There was a mental health crisis at that point on the reservation. They couldn't get people to come in. We thought we could train people who knew the culture and to do a good job. And get them certified. The federal government had just passed a law that required Head Start teachers to have more ECE credits. The closest place is 2.5 hours away. So we could figure out a way to bring those back so people could benefit from them. And, just if you're out there and you don't have to worry about your income, there's a lot of cool things you can do as long as it's stuff that they want done. A lot of outsiders come with their own agenda, or they look around from their perspective, they need this. No. What can I help you with? It's yours.
So how long have you been working on the reservations then?
Well, I've been working in the Native communities for, I can't say I've been working, right? There's kids there actually. People call me uncle, nephew. One woman last year pointed her kid at me and said she had a grandpa, which really hurt my feelings. But it's a nice thing, there's like 2 places in the world where I'm super comfortable. It's like if you're a musician, there's some places where you just feel like you're in tune, right? And that's one of them. It's home.
Yeah.
What's
the other?
home.
What's the other one?
On my beach in San Diego.
Oh, do you still travel back?
All the time, both places. Yeah.
Really? Okay, that's what you're usually off doing in summers when you're not teaching?
No, until my father-in-law died, I was going back to the reservations every summer. This last summer was the first summer in a long, long time I didn't go back to the reservation, and that was kind of cool actually to not. But I'm still working with some schools. The people at Standing Rock, I did some consulting with some of the organizations after the protests were over. I've done mediation between the government and the tribes earlier on. Just, like I said, I'm broadly trained. I listen, I watch. I don't have my own agenda most of the time, and if I do, it's well known. And you just from talking to me, you know that. And don't feel like it's my responsibility to save anybody or anything. It's just like, there's justice and there's just us, right? And social justice should be wherever the problems are, not just advocating for your own, right? That includes for your own ego. So you become part of a community. You want your community to do better.
Yeah. So you feel really tied into that community now after decades. How long have you been doing that?
30.
Wow. Yeah. Where was your first teaching gig?
Well, grad school, right?
Uh-huh.
Is a gig and slavery the same thing? I don't know.
Is that what it was like?
Yeah, I was teaching a 4.4 in grad school.
Oh.
Partly because I just liked it better than the research, to be honest with you. But the first teaching gig officially was probably the tribal college. And then my first job that actually paid enough for a car that wasn't comedy was in Maine, University of Maine, Farmington. That was working mostly with first-generation college students as well.
Okay. And how long were you there for?
10 years.
10 years, and then
Then I did 1 year in Colorado, decided I did not like it, and I called my family, actually, the first day I was out there, said, don't pack, we're not moving. And I just stayed there and worked until that was over, and I went to James Madison.
And you've been there for a while now.
Yeah, 12 years.
12 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a good place. It's just, like I said, I have a passion that's still growing inside me for first generation college students. If I could find a way to tap into it better there, maybe that's a good place to end out my career. I got 10, 15 years left. I'm never going to have enough money to retire, right? My retirement accounts, I look at the retirement like pizza. If a pizza costs $10 and you got 8, no pizza. So I may not ever be able to retire. I may not have enough to retire no matter how hard I save.
Yeah.
So I want to work in some place that's meaningful, right? Even if I'm pretending that I feel like I'm having an impact, a sense of mission that I appreciate.
Where do you see your time? So in these next 10 to 15 years, where are you do you have a sense of where you're going to be putting your time in?
No.
No.
I'm actually drifting right now in between things. Like, I did the mind education stuff. We started the journal. We helped develop a field. A lot of the talks I do around the world are in that area, not in teaching.
What area was that?
Mind-brain education.
Mind-brain education.
Yes.
Where do people find information about that? Is there a...
You can just look it up on Wikipedia. But there's cognitive neuroscience is a part of it. But IMBIS, International Mind-Brain Education Society, that's a society I helped start. The journal is with Wiley Blackwell, Mind-Brain Education. But it's a broad perspective. It's really kind of cool. But, there was this fad starting, brain-based education. And when I was invited to be a visiting scholar at Harvard with Kurt Fisher and Howard Gardner in the mind-brain education group. And we thought we needed the infrastructure to allow for other fields to contribute to education. So neuroscience was one of them. Cognitive science was one of them. This is before cognitive neuro was when Brewer was really working to make cognitive neuro a thing. And development was one of the things. Sociology can contribute to educational practice. But where's the infrastructure to allow this synthesis to happen? So that were the roots of mind-brain education.
But now that's kind of over for you, or
for me, I did the journal for 12 years, I think.
Okay.
I'm managing editor for the journal for 12 years.
So how will you figure out what the next thing is? Is it passion based? Is it there's a problem, I got to solve it based?
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of cocky to think there's a problem you can solve, right? So is there a problem I want to address? Is there some? Unfortunately, I keep talking about mission and sound laudable, but it's really what game do you want to play? Because you're never going to fix everything. Everything's too complex for that. That you can have impact, and that impact can benefit one group and not and come with there's unexpected things all the time.
Yeah.
So I lived my whole life thinking about, okay, this is these people's games. How do I learn the rules so I could play that game with them? Right. So when I'm around these kind of people, this is how I act. When I'm around these kind of people, I got to change that a little bit. I'm never going to lose me, but sometimes you got to wear this shirt, this hat, that hat, whatever. You may have to code switch a little bit, whatever. But I just don't know what game to plug into. I would love to really work at this idea of what would science look like if it were really directed at making the world better through teaching. I would love that idea. I just don't know if there's an infrastructure there for it. Because a lot of people would say they're already doing it, and I wouldn't.
Forgive me for not knowing the answer to this question, but do you write, so ideas that you have like
No.
this one, do you write them up? No.
No, a lot of people ask me that to write, if I write these things down. And no, my scholarship, I mean, I'm working with a lot of people and I'm still publishing and doing things. And 3 or 4 a year, which, but the big ideas like you and I are talking about, I don't know where you'd put them, if that makes sense.
Is that part of the challenge?
Yeah. Where do we have to have these conversations? Not just the metaphors, but the priority. What's our priority as a field, as a group of scholars? What's our priority? And if this is our priority, do we have the right mechanisms to achieve those goals? We don't have really big venues for those discussions. We have task forces that tell us what we should probably be thinking about when we teach general psychology. We have a lot of those, like you're on. We have those sorts of things, which are a little more bureaucratic than what I'm talking about, right? But with these big things about, do we have a field that'll make us help us progress forward in a way that's meaningful and synthetic, right? As science, part of being a scientist is you break things down into smaller parts and you work with those, right? But a teacher can't do smaller parts. We've got a whole person in front of us, and we're a whole person. And we're in a context. It's a dynamic system. And a good teacher somehow managed to figure that out and work it, even if it's implicit. And it's no problem if it's implicit at all. You can't say how you do it, just as long as you could do it.
Yeah.
But some of us should be able to unpack that and figure out how does that work and plug it back into the system.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time, but I want to ask this question, and because while you're talking, I'm just thinking to myself that a lot of what you're talking about is obviously you really value science and the process and the research process, but there's this other piece here, which is like this. Is there something that you're talking about, being in the moment, whether it's meaning, purpose? We did talk about the moment being like a person in the room. Are there some things that you think that we'll just never be able to measure?
It's so cool. It really is, right? Because of the complexity, because of the dynamic part of the system.
Is it because is it because it's unmeasurable and we won't understand it?
Well, measurement itself is a science, right? But think about weather. Right? We can't predict a lot of weather, right? Because weather creates its own weather. Cities create their own weather. There's all these variables. We probably don't know all of them right now, let alone how they interact with each other. Teaching's by nature an interaction, right? That doesn't make us stop trying to figure out weather. It just makes us give probabilities rather than certainties, right? There's the European model. There's the American model, right? So science has progressed and gotten better and better and better and better and better at something really hard, which is just weather, right? Teaching is the same kind of thing. It's this dynamic system. It creates its own thing. It bounces around the things that it goes through. It's a really cool thing. And I'm very comfortable not knowing everything. Physicists are very comfortable not knowing everything. They make up dummy variables just to make the equation work out sometime. I love that. I love complexity. If we make it too simple, it's not real anymore.
Right. Well, my brain hurts a little bit, so I know we had a good conversation.
I could have just talked about my socks.
I loved it, and I want to just thank you for sitting down. Really nice to get to know you here on this weekend, and then
cool.
on the podcast. Thanks for doing it.
Appreciate it.